There are unfortunately several negative long-lasting effects that individuals experience as a result of being in a residential schools. That being said, children whom experience residential treatment are traumatized as they are likely to experience the minimum of one form of abuse: physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, or neglect. Mental illness that are likely to be formed in these individuals include, but are not limited in PTSD and CPTSD, depression, and anxiety. As families are forced to be separated, children are not used to being loved and cared for by their loved ones and most likely feel defeated as there is no way out. In addition, memory and dysfunction is extremely likely due to the amount of trauma that one experiences. It is probably that when children are forced into terrifying, long-lasting events and a reoccurrence of several events, they tend to disassociate themselves from situations as survival mechanisms. For example, some can attend local events and are specifically emphasize the importance of the indigenous culture. As someone who is not extremely knowledgeable on this culture, it could be very relevant for me to attend these events to increase my knowledge and ability to support this group of people. I would like to know the true meaning of indigenous culture, support them in the best way possible to ensure that the experiences and acceptance of the validation that they deserve.
The government has implemented the United Nations Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples Act in 2021. The government of Canada has used the declaration as a roadmap to work with Indigenous peoples to implement it in a way that focuses on reconciliation, healing, and cooperative relations. The government has also stated on the Government of Canada website that they are providing funding to various programs and grants that support Indigenous peoples and their cultures. For instance, the Indigenous Languages and Cultures Program, First Nation and Inuit Cultural Education Centers Program, and Listen Hear Our Voices are funded to digitize and preserve existing culture and language recordings for the future Indigenous children and generation to come. There is an Indigenous Art Center which was formed in 1965 that is targeted to support and protect the important collections of Indigenous art in Canada. The Government of Canada website stresses the importance of establishing and maintaining strong relationships with Indigenous peoples as they are essential to Parks Canada's work to contribute to the process of reconciliation between Indigenous peoples, the Government of Canada, and other Canadians. While this paints a perfect picture, the reality that Indigenous peoples face is not what it is made out to be by the Government of Canada.
We must question the reality that we live in and the way that we are socialized in the Canadian culture as both individuals and as a society. We as settlers and those who benefit from the results of colonialism must hold each other accountable for our biases and ignorance. We must confront our own biases and accept that we are settlers, as we benefit from the destruction of their culture, their family, and the stealing of their lands. We as a collective are responsible for the future of how our country respects Indigenous people and take accountability for our past and current wrongdoings. We have to teach our children and future generations about the accurate history of how Eurocentrism and colonialism were the driving forces in the creation of Canada. By teaching and continuously taking accountability as individuals and as a society who benefit from the results of colonialism and racism against Indigenous peoples, we get rid of the ignorance in our culture. We know that the dominant group has expressed racism in historic contexts and continues to express racism in current contexts as well. To stop this racist rhetoric from continuing in our future Canadian society, we need to teach the future generations about the shameful past of Canada so that we can address and combat racism individually and collectively. We also need to get rid of the racist language and terminologies when addressing Indigenous peoples. There are current legal documents that still include the terminology Aboriginal to describe Indigenous people. We have to continuously work towards solidarity as individuals and as a society. So this means that we have to unlearn and relearn continuously. We need to recognize that we are on stolen land that belongs to Indigenous people, and unfortunately as of now, the Canadian government only recognizes 0.2% of Indigenous title over the land. Overall, as individuals and as a society, we can do so much in relation to doing better in fighting the systemic, institutional, and structural racism against Indigenous people. We need to utilize and incorporate anti-oppressive practices and approaches into our lives, and that means we have to look at both the present and the past in order to look at a future in the context of Canada that actually celebrates multiculturalism and is accepting of diversity and inclusivity. Any changes that we make should be based within an indigeneity that has survived through resistance and resilience. Anything less than that is still considered colonialism.